Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today's video, running back rankings for Week 9. We'll have a chance here, hopefully, to get into some of the trade deadline news, how it impacts some of these players, as well as we get through the top 30 at the position for Week 9. We'll do the same here, something similar as we always do for wide receivers with our start sit for wide receivers, so be sure to tune into that on Friday. But if you guys are new to the channel and haven't heard about our awesome giveaway with our partners over at Betfred, if you are in the state of Ohio online sports betting launches on January 1st. And what we're doing with Betfred is giving away 2 sweet tickets to this weekend's game against the Carolina Panthers in Cincinnati. 2 tickets to the Betfred Suite. All you have to do is, if you're in the state of Ohio, pre-register at the link below and you'll be entered to win. We'll announce the winner on Friday's episode, our wide receiver start sit video. The winner will be announced there. 2 tickets to a suite for the Bengals game. So again, that link is down below. You get the Bet 50, get 250 promo they're always doing in all their legal states as well. Another $20 free bet. And then there's plenty going on opening day, January 1st in Ohio. They'll have plenty of giveaways for people as well if you do pre-register. All right, let's get to the top 30 at the position. Tons of buys this week. So there are some players I think that are in the top 30 that still aren't players that you're going to be very excited to play. Just being a shallower week, we're looking at some guys as RB2s that we're going to need to get involved. So let's get through it, starting with our top 6. Austin Eckler is my number 1 back on the week. A lot of this comes down to the fact that the Chargers look like they're going to be playing with Joshua Palmer, DeAndre Carter, and Michael Bandy, 3 guys that are slot receivers are going to be spreading this offense out for the Chargers. I tweeted earlier this week that if the Chargers didn't do anything at the trade deadline and these were the 3 guys that were starting, I'd hang myself from the CN Tower. So I'm going to have to actually try to do that. But yeah, so Austin Eckler will be the guy who's continuing to get he's had 12 receptions back-to-back weeks now. Obviously, they're coming off the bye. Hasn't helped them on the injury front. Was really hoping they'd add Elijah Moore. Hasn't materialized, so Eckler's a big play this week for sure. At 2, Derrick Henry going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. I do expect Henry to have another good game on the ground like he did last week against the Texans. Maybe not to the same degree, but there is a chance as well that the Chiefs give up plenty of receptions to running back, so we could see that continue for Henry in this matchup. At 3, Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne is a league winner, guys. Looking at that performance against the Broncos is everything you want to see from this guy. The receiving work was a little lighter, but he was killing it on the ground, continuing to break explosive plays. He is a stud, and the Raiders are 24th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Travis Etienne might not leave my top 5 at the position week in and week out for the foreseeable future with his workload that is expected. At 4, Josh Jacobs going against those same Jaguars. Again, Jacobs is a guy that they're getting the ball to a ton. Last week was brutal for him, but I expect him to bounce back against the Jags, who are 25th in fantasy points allowed, and they're just a terrible tackling team as well. So a good matchup for Jacobs. At 5, Aaron Jones going against the Lions. The Lions, 30th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, have been brutal. I expect the Packers to handle this team, this Lions team, and be able to score quite a bit. Going back to, I remember last year in week 2 after they got killed by, was it the Saints? I'm trying to remember, but I remember they bounced back in a big way, and I think they take care of business against the Lions on the road, and Jones plays a big part, both as a pass catcher. His reception totals at the sports books at Betfred have been set at like 4.5, 5.5. Like the expectation here is that he's adding 5 receptions a game on top of his work on the ground. So a great play against the Lions. At 6, Miles Sanders. Sanders going against those Houston Texans on Thursday night, and Houston dead last in fantasy points allowed to running backs. We saw Derrick Henry go for 200 yards last week. I don't expect that to change here. Well, I don't expect Sanders to go for 200, but I don't expect this to be a team that suddenly figures out how to stop the run. Sanders, being the RB1 in Philadelphia, should benefit from that in a what the sportsbooks expect to be a very positive game script for Miles Sanders. So with that, let's get to the Betfred Boost for Thursday night. Last weekend, just a complete and utter dud. Need to bounce back. Thinking the Texans were going to be able to help us get to an over with the Titans was just a terrible call by me. But I'm looking to bounce back this week, and I think this is far too many points for the Eagles, getting minus 14 on the road in Houston. I know the Texans are, right now I think they are, they tied with the Lions for the worst record in the NFL, only have 1 win on the season. I do think they're a better team than what this number indicates, especially at home. I'm taking a double-digit dog at home every single time, especially one that's 2+ touchdowns. So give me the Texans plus 14. And then as well, I know my guy that some people have not been happy with how I've been ranking Dameon Pierce lately, but I'm going to get Get behind Dameon Pierce. I like him in this matchup. I think the Eagles are a team that have been very good defensively, but a lot of that is because of how good they've been against the pass. I'm not sure they're as good against the run, which we'll get into when we talk about Pierce. I'm taking his over rushing yards, 63.5. So parlaying the Texans plus 14 and the over 63.5, that's going to be boosted over at Betfred. Again, go sign up, whether obviously in Ohio, can't bet on it yet, but if any other legal state that Betfred is available, go sign up, bet 50, get 250. We're jamming this parlay. I'm hitting this parlay this week. It's happening. So go sign up, get in on the boosted parlay in the boosted section over at Betfred. All right, getting into the rest of the top 12. Dalvin Cook comes in at number 7. Cook going against the Washington Commanders, who have been a good run defense, but fantasy-wise, haven't been as good. 23rd in fantasy points allowed to the running back position. So Dalvin Cook is a player to fire away in what should be a positive game script for the Vikings. Kenneth Walker in at 8. Again, guys, we're getting to that point where Walker is going to be an excellent sell high. This is another great matchup, though. The Cardinals 21st in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Walker has looked fantastic. He's looking like one of the most talented running backs in the NFL right now. He's been fantastic. Especially that touchdown was just a completely broken down play. It looked like he was going to be stuffed a few yards short of the line of scrimmage and then found a way to score. So his talent is looking like it's going to fit right in the NFL for quite a while now. So a great start this week against the Cardinals. At 9, Joe Mixon going against the Carolina Panthers. Carolina's 26th in fantasy points allowed to running backs after just a dreadful week for the Bengals offense on Monday night against the Browns. I expect them to get on the ground game a little bit more. They were very, very pass happy against the Browns early in that game, which I think just didn't make a lot of sense. I think here in a better matchup, or not in a better matchup, in a matchup that's almost as good against the Browns run defense, I think they'll look to get the ball to Mixon a little bit earlier in the game here. And I think Mixon, in hopefully what I expect to be a positive game script for Cincinnati, will be able to benefit from that and have a RB1 week. At 10, Alvin Kamara against the Ravens. The Ravens are a solid run defense, but for as long as Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry aren't available, Kamara's involvement in the pass game, especially with Andy Dalton at quarterback, is something that you can't look past. So, he's not the most efficient runner, but as a pass catcher, I think we're in a good spot for him. At 11, I can't believe I'm doing this. Jamal Williams in at 11 against the Packers, who are 31st in rush DVOA. They're a terrible run defense, and I don't know what Dan Campbell has done. I don't know what Jamal Williams has been able to do to just keep DeAndre Swift off the field and keep DeAndre Swift from getting any touches inside the red zone. It's just terrible. So I've got to accept the fact that regardless of whether or not I think Jamal Williams is any good, he's Dan Campbell's guy right now in those important scoring situations, and I expect the Lions to find some success on the ground. So he's my RB11 on the week. At 12, Jonathan Taylor going against the Patriots, who are second in fantasy points allowed, but they are 27th in rush DVOA. I expect, Sam Ehlinger had a pretty efficient performance, but I don't expect them to, change the game plan. They'll still be riding the run game here. So Taylor ekes into the top 12 for me in a week that's just not filled with a lot of depth. At 13, Raheem Mostert. That was a tough one for me. I really liked Raheem Mostert last week, but definitely busted. Didn't help to not have that early lead. The Lions went up early, so he didn't get that game script. But here I expect that to be more what I saw last week. The Chicago Bears are 31st in run defense, 29th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Jeff Wilson, I think, is going to have an impact. It scares me to see McDaniel trade for Jeff Wilson because, Jeff Wilson's a player he's familiar with, much like he was familiar with Raheem Mostert. So don't think that the addition of Jeff Wilson is a nothing addition for this team. It hurts Raheem Mostert. I'm pissed because I told you guys to buy low on him, and now I think this could have an impact on his finish rest of season. I don't think it's going to be the case right away in week 1, but something to monitor, and Wilson is definitely a player to add probably for free off the wire. I'm thinking a lot of people don't think this is impactful. I definitely think it is. At 14, Ramondre Stevenson, a tough matchup against the Colts, but so long as we're seeing these quarterbacks, Mac Jones, whether it's Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi, checking the ball down, it'll probably be Mac Jones again this week coming off the win, but Mac Jones looked terrible. Ramondre Stevenson's getting a lot of work in the receiving game, and he's still the lead guy right now when it comes to the rushing carries as well. So Ramondre Stevenson is still a solid play, but more of an RB2 for me this week. At 15, A.J. Dillon. I'm expecting an A.J. Dillon big week here. This is a Detroit team that is 30th in rush DVOA. They're one of the worst in fantasy points allowed. I think Dillon will have a solid week. I think the Packers will ride the ground game and look to put away this Detroit Lions team pretty early, and Dillon should get plenty of work here. At 16, Dameon Pierce. Like I mentioned, the Eagles, 14th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, but they're 22nd in rush DVOA. I think if Houston wants to win this game or stay in this game, and they've been giving Pierce the ball a ton, that rushing total I mentioned with Pierce, he didn't go over last week. We kind of expected that going against the Titans defense, how good it is against the run. But Pierce had gone over 63.5 rushing yards in 5 straight games prior to that. They're just feeding him the ball. The problem is, and why I don't have him as a top 12 back, is can he score? Is he going to find the end zone in this game? I think he could, but I think this is more of where I want to put Pierce in terms of his ranking on a week-to-week basis. And if I'm wrong on the spread and the Eagles get a run away with this game early, like the point spread indicates, then we're not having a game script where Pierce is going to be able to perform. At 18, DeAndre Swift. I expect Swift to still be involved. The trade of TJ Hawkinson is going to open up the receiving game for Swift, I think, a little bit more. So I do expect Swift to still have a good week in a positive matchup. I'm just not giving him the ceiling that Jamal Williams seems to have right now. At 19, Deonta Foreman. Foreman is a player that I've seen from some other rankings of people having him as a top 12 back. Look, the product of a good game script is what's going to tell me whether or not Deonta Foreman's going to have a good week. And here against the Bengals, who are 9th in fantasy points allowed, I don't expect his week to be to quite the degree it's been the last 2 weeks in terms of volume. If Chuba Hubbard's available, I think it has an impact. But I don't have Chuba Hubbard expecting to play. But Foreman I have as a RB back-end RB2 here in a tougher matchup against the Bengals. At 20, Eno Benjamin. Benjamin I have with the expectation of Darrell Williams being available, but no James Conner. Again, I'm doing this early in the week, so I'm going to lean to the side of an injury, a guy not returning from injury if he missed last week, unless I have a really good feeling that he will be back. So Seattle, 27th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Benjamin has the clear lead here. Darrell Williams did get, I believe it was right around 20 snaps or so, but I doubled him in snaps. So nothing to be too worried about with Benjamin having a lot more work in the last few weeks and building that edge. At 21, Devin Singletary going against the Jets. The Jets are 10th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, but they're massive underdogs in this game. I don't think the addition of Nyheim Hines has an immediate impact. I think Singletary's been really good so far this year, but it does, speak to the fact of adding Nyheim Hines means they want to see somebody better in the receiving game, which I think has an impact at some point, but I don't think it's quite this week. So I do have Singletary as a guy you do want to play. At 22, Leonard Fournette. The Rams, man, are 2nd in run defense grade from PFF, 12th in fantasy points allowed. This offensive line can't get any sort of push up front to be able to run the ball. Do I want to lean on Fournette purely as a receiving back with Rachaad White getting snaps on 3rd down as well? No. I'll play Fournette here, but this isn't a good matchup, so expectations are pretty low. At 23, Caleb Huntley going against the Chargers. The Chargers' run defense, absolutely terrible. Oh, I missed Tyler Algier, actually. He's my RB17, but we'll just mention on this with Caleb Huntley still being an RB2 as well. But the Chargers' run defense is absolute dog shit. It's terrible. Their defense is incredibly banged up. I expect both Caleb Huntley and Tyler Algier to be plenty fed the ball, probably 10, 12. I would expect Huntley to get 12 plus touches in this game. Algier might get closer to 18, and they'll probably burn the Chargers on the ground. This is a tight spread in this game. The Chargers look terrible, so I expect these guys to be able to, be in a game script. Regardless of game script, they're still running the ball, but I expect them to find some success here. So I would play both of these guys. I picked up Huntley off the wire in one of my leagues after waivers ran, so I think he's a great player you could still pick up and start right away. At 24, Michael Carter rounding out the top 24. It's a tough, going against the Bills is a problem here for Carter, who are 5th in rush DVOA, 3rd in fantasy points allowed to running backs. So as we get into this last set of 6 here after Carter, it's just a barren wasteland. These are guys I'm probably not wanting to start, but considering 6 teams on bye, I do have to start. Carter can be a really good receiving back, so that's what we have to lean on here. But again, Zach Wilson has been terrible. I expect them to potentially look to move the ball on the ground pretty consistently here, regardless of the game script even, because trusting Zach Wilson to throw the football is just not something I would expect Robert Saleh to want to do. So at 25, Justice Hill. I I'm leaning towards Hill having the advantage on the ground. I'm expecting Gus Edwards not to play. A hamstring injury, something I don't think this team wants to mess with, especially considering they brought, they played Gus Edwards, Mark Andrews, and Rashad Bateman last week, and all of them didn't make it through the game. So I'm leaning on the fact that Gus Edwards won't be available, and this will be Justice Hill and Kenyon Drake. Hill is the guy that has been with the organization longer, and I'm expecting, like we saw with Gus Edwards, him to be the guy they look to a little bit more, but I think it'll still be a pretty well split game here, so I don't have high expectations. But the Saints are a good run defense, 8th in fantasy points, 9th in run defense grade, so a tough matchup regardless. At 26, Darrell Henderson. Henderson splitting time with Malcolm Brown, Ronnie Rivers. Ronnie Rivers, I think, might have even had the edge in rushing attempts. I think Darrell Henderson had a slight edge in snaps. So tough matchup against the Bucks. 7th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, but their run defense isn't as good as we expected it to be coming into the season. They're 24th in run defense grade. So Darrell Henderson's the guy I want to play of the three, but I don't have a lot of expectations for any of these guys. Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 27. The Titans, really good run defense. They're 5th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. They're one of the best run defenses in the league. This is a three-way split here. Clyde has the advantage, but Isaiah Pacheco, Jerick McKinnon still involved. So definitely a spot where if you want to play Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I get it. You're probably in a tough spot, but any way you can lean out of it, I would. At 28, Antonio Gibson. The Vikings 1st in run defense, 6th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, but Gibson is the guy who has the advantage in the receiving game for Washington here, and that is where he can find some success. Gibson has the advantage in terms of just being more productive between him and Brian Robinson, who is outside of my top 30 on the week. So if I'm looking to play a Washington running back, it would be Antonio Gibson, but expectations are not very high for me for this Washington rushing attack. At 29, David Montgomery. Tough matchup here against the Dolphins, 4th in run defense grade. It's a really good run defense. And quite frankly, I think Khalil Herbert's the better back, but Montgomery has the clear advantage in snaps. He's more than doubled Khalil Herbert in snaps last week. Could that change? Potentially. I hope so. I think Khalil Herbert's better for this team, but Montgomery, nothing's changed. And it's been, 8 weeks of the season so far. So I wouldn't expect anything to be different from week-to-week basis, but I don't have high expectations for Montgomery. Rounding out the top 30, Damian Harris against the Colts. Harris's workload has just bottomed out, it seems like, since he came back from injury. Ramondre Stevenson has a clear advantage, especially in the receiving game as well. So it's a tough matchup for Harris. This is a player that I'm still just kind of waiting. You got to wait and see on, keep him on your bench, but not someone you're trying to play. All right, that's the top 30. Some guys that were left out here. I've got James Robinson's my RB 34, Khalil Herbert at the 32. Guys like Darrell Williams, Kenyon Drake, right around RB 35 and 36. One guy, if you're really desperate, I mentioned Derrick Henry and that receiving work he could get. Dontrell Hilliard, if you're in a really bad spot this week, is someone I think you could pick up off the wire and just kind of plug in if you can't get Caleb Huntley, just because the Chiefs are allowing 9 receptions per game to running backs, and Hilliard gets plenty of that work, spelling Derrick Henry on third downs and whatnot. So that could be a spot you look to if you're really, really desperate. But he's my RB 37 on the week. All right, that's the top 30 for week 9. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe to the channel as well if you enjoyed. And of course, Betfred down below. If you're in the state of Ohio, go click that link and you will be entered to win a pair of sweet tickets at the Betfred Suite for this week's game in Cincinnati against the Carolina Panthers. All right, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.